Good evening, America. Welcome to the Leslie Marshall Show. This is Mark Levine. Strap yourself down, prepare yourself for an emotional 3 hours. We are continuing the topic that we started yesterday, the topic of the mistreatment of children all across America. Brutal beatings, isolation chambers, denial of food and water and sleep, psychological torture, brainwashing. It sounds like Abu Ghraib. It sounds like torture. It is torture. But it sounds like the kind of thing that we were doing to prisoners abroad, or frankly Al-Qaeda was doing to us. It's not. It's the kind of abuse that goes on in residential centers all across the nation, and it's happening to children, not to soldiers, not to hardened veterans. I mean, it would be terrible if it happened to them. I think of the things that John McCain went through when he was in a North Vietnamese prison camp. No, it's actually happening to children all across the country. We talked for 3 hours yesterday. If you're just joining in, if you're new to the topic, I want to encourage you to listen closely, because this is the kind of thing that we need to stop in America. Most of these groups are faith-based, but I don't believe that I don't want to believe, let's just say, that the churches that are sponsoring them know what's going on. Although, as we're going to find out later in the show, some of these people have ties to some very high political officials. Also coming up in the show is an interview I did with Greg Kutz. He is the investigator at the Government Accountability Office who investigated these claims of abuse and delivered a paper in 2007, 2008. Don't be surprised and don't be offended if you haven't heard about this. It's probably the greatest child abuse story in America that you don't know. But thousands of people do know, the thousands of people who attended these programs. Adults today, some in their 50s, some in their 20s. People who talk about the abuse they suffered, psychological, physical. Already my lines are full. I knew this would happen because it happened yesterday. There are so many people that are trying to call in and have their voice be heard. And I'm going to issue an apology right in advance to everyone listening to my voice who is a survivor of these abusive programs. The apology is this. There are so many of you. The problem is so widespread, and so many of you have expressed interest in my show that we're not going to have time. I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to have time in the 3 hours we have tonight to hear all your voices. So I do apologize. The lines, as I said, are already full. And I also apologize if after hearing a little bit of your story, I move on to the next person. I want as many people to get their voices heard as possible. You can also live blog it. You can go to my Facebook page, my Facebook fan page, facebook.com/Mark Levine TV. I do that because I do TV as well as radio. It's also my Twitter account, Mark Levine TV, MarkLevine TV. And post there, talk with each other there. Whether you are someone who has survived these programs or whether you're someone hearing about this for the first time, it's a great place for you to talk to each other. It'll be like a chat room for us tonight, particularly because I know I'm not going to get to all of you. So my apology being made in advance. Let me go to the first person on the lines, Angelique in San Francisco. Welcome to the show. Hi, Angelique. Tell me what happened to you.
Well, I was at Cross Creek Manor in 1993. I've talked to some recent survivors that have also reported very similar things, witnessing things that had happened to me.
Where is Cross Creek Manor?
With other survivors.
Where is Cross Creek Manor?
Laverkin, Utah. It's near. It's kind of centered in between various different, like, polygamist, fundamentalist, Mormon.
And how did you get sent
communities.
there? Well, who sent you there?
My mom sent me there. I spent a month in a charter. I had some family problems. I mean, to be honest, just for the sake of, speaking up for kids that come from these homes. But many of the homes are already pretty abusive, so the kids come out looking like there's something wrong with them when, they just naturally, obviously, there's a normal recourse to have depression and various things like that. I actually had been pre-accepted to a Bible college at the time. I was a few months short of going into college, and I did eventually go to that Bible college. I kind of want to focus on solutions tonight, but I'll tell you briefly.
Tell me briefly what happened to you, because some people didn't hear the show yesterday, Angelique, and so as an early caller, you have the burden, the unfortunate burden of educating a lot of people who've never heard of this. To tell them what you suffered.
There were about 20 or so different WASP. It's called Worldwide Association Specialty Programs.
WWASP. Yep. Go ahead.
Yes. And there's about 20 different programs. My program was actually what other survivors call the Club Med of WASP. And regardless of that...
Did they mean that ironically?
No, actually, because other kids were, dog cage, put in little, like shack cells. Rape occurred for boys and girls in various different countries. And I believe in Utah as well. But what happened to me specifically was I spent 4.5 months, half the time in an isolation room, and I think that was particularly on behalf that I had written a letter to friends once I realized what the score was when I was there, to come and get me. And anything that suggested you might try and have communication with the outside world, which was not allowed. Mail would be confiscated if anything like this occurred. And what basically happened was I spent 4.5 months, half the time in an isolation room, and, was watched all the time.
Well, 4 to 5 months in an isolation room. Now, does that mean you were in complete isolation? Nobody was allowed to, who did you see when you were in an isolation room?
At night, I would see like a kid walk by and go to bed. But I would spend 3-day periods in isolation, on and off for about 4.5 months, in a 5 by 10 foot room, and they would constantly give you different various things that they would say you did bad, and you would have to write about them all the time. And I think the worst thing that happened to me there, I'm more than sure I was on Haldol because my face would twitch incessantly, and it wasn't like normal eye twitches or anything like that. But I was also physically attacked and put in, slammed to the floor, had my face ripped open.
Had your face, well, hold on, because this is some powerful stuff. You've lived through it, but a lot of people need to take the time to digest this. You said you had your face ripped open. I hate to ask you to be more specific, but they punched you in the face? What are you talking about?
They just, slammed my head down to the floor, and I think that was pretty typical of WASP programs where kids had their chins grinded to the point where they, had their jaw broken.
And how old were you?
I was 17, and fortunately, I had my mom got me out of the isolation room the day upon I entered the dorm rooms at Seattle Pacific.
Now how did your mom find out about the abuse at WWASP?
Sorry?
How did your mom find out about the abuse? How did you communicate with her?
I didn't go into any kind of details with her, actually, and because of my background having already been abusive, I didn't expect much, concern. Parents automatically are already ticked off that they spent so much money on these programs. They a lot of times know that they've been frauded because they send their kids to these programs on the basis that they're going to, finish their high school education. And
so they want to participate.
In New York alone, WASP had 113 false diplomas that they issued.
Wow. Okay, I want to quickly move on to another caller, but I know you had something to say from the outset. You want to talk about how to fix the situation?
Yeah, I think that this is really catching on as an issue. I don't know if you saw the link through Reddit, but it's like all the media stations are picking this up, and this is the time for survivors and anybody else to contact everybody they know and to follow up in contacting the different stations that are interested in covering this issue and trying to get some interviews going, as well as exposing. Romney has not only been involved in this one time with Straight, but also with WASP and now with Aspen. And I've done campaigns, congressional campaigns for Republicans. This is not an issue of conservatism or politics. It's an issue of dirty, greedy, old people money. And, the shame that people try to hide when these things occur. There's no shame in this. It's time for people to take this issue on, much larger organizations. CAFTI's working on it, but we need something.
Hold on, because people, again, not everyone knows what you're referring to, and I want to make it clear. CAFTI is spelled like safety, only with a C.
CAFTI is like a cafe. And
exactly. CAFETI. STY.org, and you can go there. It's a great place. You're absolutely right. It's a great resource. There's also survivingstraightinc.com. There's also restoringdignity.org. I'm going to talk with the director of that in just a bit. And also, you should know, Angelique, and everyone listening, that I spoke with Congressman Miller's office, and I have a statement from him. He is the member of Congress who has drafted a bill to actually end this abuse, to regulate these centers. And so we are working hard to do something about it. I'm sorry to move on, Angelique. I'd love to talk to you all day. I just got so many people on the lines. Thank you very much for calling and sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. Let's go on to Simone in Howard, Kansas. Hello, Simone.
Tonight.
Hi, Simone. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so tell me what happened to you.
I was at the New Bethany Home for Boys and Girls in Arcadia, Louisiana. It is a Lester Roloff-based home.
Okay, now back up. So when were you there?
I was there from 1981 to 1984. I was 13 years old when I went into New Bethany.
And tell our listeners who Lester Roloff is.
Excuse me?
Tell our listeners who Lester Roloff is.
Lester Roloff was not actually the founder of the New Bethany Home. Mac Ford was. Lester Roloff is a man that had several different homes in Texas, in Mississippi, and down by the Gulf Coast. His homes were closed down by the state for abuse. He had a home that pregnant girls were beaten in. He had a home that young boys were abused and molested. He had another girls' home where the girls were abused. And Mac Ford met Lester Roloff in the early 70s and felt that he was called by God to open a home. And the offenses against children at the New Bethany Home were, physical, emotional, spiritual, sexual. It was a virtual smorgasbord for pedophiles.
Wow. Now, what did you see with your own eyes?
I am a victim of rape from New Bethany.
I'm sorry.
I was raped by the principal of the school. I was there for 3 years, and I would say that I was raped 2 to 4 times a week the whole time. Two to four
times a week?
Yes, sir.
At age 13?
Yes.
And did you try to tell someone, your mom? You didn't trust them, your dad?
I don't have any parents. I'm an orphan. I tried to run away constantly. There were 9-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on the top. And I made it to the Arcadia Police Department once, and I was black and blue, and some of my wounds were open. And the officer that I spoke with said, well, let's call your parents. I didn't have any, so he took me back to the home.
Oh, my God. Now,
I am a coordinator now for an organization called Heal Online. It's heal-online.org.
Okay.
And I am also on the subcommittee for another organization called SIA-now.org.
SIA-NOW, right? Survivors of Institutional Abuse.
Yes. Yes, and we are having, actually in February, we are having a convention in Long Beach that any and all survivors are invited to. And our motto is, united with one voice.
Absolutely.
We feel that the more people that we get together, we can be productive in speaking out, in supporting one another. Recently, I don't know if you got to watch the special on CNN, Anderson Cooper 360. It was the Ungodly Discipline. They did a special on the Hephzibah House girls. And Hephzibah House is in Indiana. But Heal Online, we have probably at about 10,000 pages. And what we do is we take information in regards to these homes. People call us and let us know that they were abused in these homes.
Right.
We put them on our investigate list. We get as much information as possible on these homes. Angela Smith is the founder. She does program reviews.
I'm so glad the story's getting out. I'm sorry to cut you off. I got to take a break. It's the nature of radio, and I got a lot of people on the lines. Thank you for all you shared. If you have more to share, and I know I'm cutting you off, just go to the website. Go to marklevineradio.com or marklevine.tv. post it all there in the comments, and people can share the resources there. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you for your time, Mark. Have a good night.
I appreciate it. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. This is Mark Levine talking about a very emotional issue, the abuse and torture of children and teenagers all throughout the United States at residential camps that are supposed to be helping them, supposed to be treating them. This is something that has occurred as long ago as the 70s, possibly earlier. Actually, I'm told some of them occurred even earlier. But even worse than that is that it's still continuing today. Let's go right to Trish in New York City. Hello, Trish.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
So I'm sorry to ask, what happened to you?
Well, just a little background.
Sure.
I'm a transsexual woman.
Okay.
I have Asperger's syndrome. And my parents were sort of at a loss.
They didn't know what to do with you.
At the time that I was very small. And I really didn't do too well in school either. So by the time I graduated high school, and actually I was 18 when I got put into Kids of North Jersey, which
is that legal? How can they force you against your will when you're an adult?
Wow. Well, this sort of, and this is sort of what happened. I was actually homeless at the time, and actually I went by my own accord. I mean, I went in there. I had actually taken my parents' car as sort of as a cry for help. I actually stole their car.
Okay, so they put you
so
there.
I was, and I knew, like, I actually left a note. I'm taking your car. This is where it's going to be.
Trish, we don't have a lot of time. Tell me what you saw in the place you were put.
Well, this is, and actually I don't remember much, to be perfectly honest. Like, it was that traumatic for me. I really don't remember much of what happened in there, but by the end of it, my brother was in there for wanting to go to a rock concert. Wow. They had pretty much gotten my whole family involved.
So what did you see? Were there beatings, psychological abuse?
I mean, there's some stuff that I probably, on radio I just really probably shouldn't even talk about because stuff that happened to me. But, there was a lot of, like, physical beatings. There was...
I tell you what, I want you to think about it. I'm going to take a break. I'll give you all the time, and then I want you to come back and tell me whatever you feel you can tell me. For anyone else who wants to call in, the toll-free number is 888-653-7543. We've got a lot of people who want to share their stories, and I want to hear from you. This is an important issue. And coming up, we're going to hear from the government official who studied what happened here. Right back after this. Welcome back to the show. I apologize to those who are listening on the stream via the website. It is now up. It should be up. And, of course, those of you on radio have been listening for about half an hour. There will be the archive posted tonight, I promise, so that anything you miss, you will be able to hear. On the line, I have Trish from New York City was talking about her experience. Trish, tell me some of the worst things you saw, please.
I was referring to something before, and I haven't talked about this very widely, so... But in 2001, I didn't remember a lot of what happened to me. I started looking a little bit in 2001 about where I had been, Kids in North Jersey, and I wasn't finding a lot about it, so I also looked up straight. And I started reading a little bit about it. And as I was reading, and I found the stuff of Kids of Bergen County in North Jersey, and I found Kim Smith's site, which is kidsofbergencounty.com, and I started reading, a lot of memories started coming back, and one in particular came back, which I'm not going to get into detail about,
okay.
But essentially it was a sexual assault in a host home.
I'm sorry.
And I couldn't really handle the memory that much. What happened after that was, a lot of people talked about the aftermath of what happens after you come out and, all the abuse and everything else.
A lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Yeah.
Is that, with all this abuse and everything else and what happened in there, and a lot of people have talked about, what went on inside But what happens afterwards is, I think, even more important, because the trauma of seeing the abuse and people, restrained and being restrained yourself. And, I wasn't, at 18 years old, I signed in voluntarily. I mean, my parents said essentially you go to jail or you sign yourself in voluntarily. But essentially it was only for 14 days that I had signed myself in.
And how long were you in, Trish?
I was in for almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. You signed in for 14 days. You were sexually assaulted, and I assume no one was ever punished for what they did to you.
No.
Trish, I'm sorry I need to move on, but thank you very much for your call. I know you could talk all day. Everyone here could. Thank you again. If you have more to say, please feel free to comment on my blog. I really appreciate your calling in. I do want to go next, though, to Professor Lou Jablonski. He's someone I asked specifically to be here. He is a professor in Santa Monica, California. He's a professor at the California State University, Northridge. He wrote a book, actually an article, Whatever Happened to Synanon, Synanon, The Birth of the Anti-Criminal Therapeutic Community. He published this article in the Criminal Justice Policy Review, and he's author of a number of books on criminology and juvenile delinquency. Professor Jablonski, thank you very much for coming here on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
So you've studied this phenomenon of these residential centers all across the country that are abusing children.
Well, let's hold on a minute here.
Okay.
In 1960, I was giving a paper at the United Nations Conference on Crime and Delinquency.
Yeah.
And I met a Dr. Donald Cressy. I'll be brief how I got into this phenomenon. And he told me about a place in Santa Monica, California, where they were treating heroin addicts called Synanon. It intrigued me, and that year I took a professorship at UCLA and came out here to the coast, and I went down to Synanon, and I was there for about, in terms of doing research there, for about 10 years. And in the process, I found a really exciting, very positive phenomenon. Now, I understand, that some of the spin-offs have been terrible, and you could say the same thing about Christianity, that there are some crazy...
And I don't dispute that some of these programs work, but tell me this, how do you distinguish between the ones that work and the ones that we're hearing from so many people talk about, the ones that end up with sexual abuse and beatings and denial of food and sleep? And
those really have nothing to do with the original, which is, by the way, all over the world, in Germany, Italy, and so forth. I'll tell you how it works on the positive level. When it gets into what you're talking about, there's nothing there that I have any interest in. Essentially, they were these encounter groups in the early days. As I said, I'm going back 50 years. And by the way, I did write a book called Synanon, The Tunnel Back, which was based on the 5 years I worked there. And fundamentally, what Synanon did, in fact, on a positive level, was create what I would refer to as experienced therapists. These were individuals who had been addicted, had been some heroin addicts and so forth, and they went through a transition to change their lives around, and then they were helping others. And in the early days, the first 5 or 10 years of Synanon were phenomenal and actually a great place to be.
Probably similar to Alcoholics Anonymous, I would assume, which has been very successful.
Well, Chuck Diedrich, who was the founder of Synanon, had been in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then he started in 1958, and he had a group of ex-alcoholics, and some drug addicts in Venice, California, wandered into the group sessions he began to run every night, and he noticed that they stopped using drugs as a result of these intense group sessions.
But Professor,
and he created what was called Synanon, which
right. And I don't doubt that some of them work, but I got to challenge you, though, because I've had so many people call in. We had 3 hours last night. We've have our lines are full right now of people that describe a lot more than group therapy. They describe beatings. They describe people yelling and screaming in their face. One woman last night described getting in a boxing ring, being forced to box someone much bigger than she is, being denied, being put in isolation. You may have heard of Angelique just a few minutes ago, putting in isolation for months. Being denied food and water and sleep. These programs, again, I don't doubt that some are successful, but I hope you agree with me that they need some regulation to separate the good ones from the bad ones.
Absolutely. I mean, the original one, as I said, was Synanon, and by the way, you know, the therapeutic community movement is worldwide. There's a worldwide association, and they meet regularly. In fact, they're meeting in Brazil now. Now, I have no responsibility for the terrible things which I'm sure happen to some people. And like as I say, I would use the parallel that the Christian religion is and Catholicism, you know, is a positive thing. But then you have guys like.
But Professor, I guess I want to challenge you here because look, I don't have responsibility in the sense that I didn't conduct any of these programs. I don't doubt that you didn't conduct any of these programs. But as someone in the field that you're in, it would seem to me that you do have a responsibility, for example, to parents who don't know whether they're going to have something where their child can actually be cured or helped and something where their child's going to be beaten and sexually abused. As someone who writes about these programs, shouldn't there be a way that you can help people distinguish? Because I got to tell you, these abusive cases, it's not just 1 or 2 or 10 or 20. I'm hearing from hundreds, and later on I'm going to have a guy in the government who investigated thousands of cases of abuse all across the country. So I don't think these are isolated situations.
Oh, I'm not arguing. I'm not. You're challenging me on something I agree with.
Okay, good.
There are offshoots of many ideas which go awry, and a parent should thoroughly investigate any place where they're going to put their child. But as I say in my book, The Tunnel Back, I describe the positive therapy. For example, one of the major, I can think of just 3 that are significant ones, Amity and the one in San Francisco and in New York, Phoenix House. These are positive places where people get help with their addiction. The fact that there are some crazy, that there are nuts out there who start up places where they get go over the line in terms of what you're talking about, I'm sure exists.
Let me raise some specifics with you, if I could.
Some of these,
like, for example, WWASP. Are you aware of them? That's one that's been mentioned by many people as abusive. Do you know about that?
Let's see. You're Mark, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Mark. I'm 86 years old. In 1960, from 1960 to 70, I wrote the book on Synanon.
Okay.
Synanon, by the way, went off the trolley tracks, too, in certain respects. And there are a lot of places that I really don't know about, and I haven't been...
Well, I know I'm sure you're familiar with Straight Ink.
I've heard about it.
I'm sure you're familiar with Straight Ink because that was around back in the 70s. You must be familiar with Straight.
No.
You're not familiar with Straight?
I'm familiar with Amity, Delancey Street in San Francisco.
Okay. Are any of these positive
House.
ones going on today?
If you're calling on me to attack the therapeutic community concept, I won't do that.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I don't doubt that there can be...
is that there are some individuals who, in the guise of running a place that is trying to cure or treat alcoholism, addiction, and so forth, and they go awry, certainly they exist.
Okay. I'll tell you this. The Phoenix House, the ones you named that you thought were good programs, they still exist today?
Oh, yeah. Phoenix House, Delancey Street, for example, Delancey Street in San Francisco, who's the famous lady in the Congress who was, she's friends with Mimi Silver, who founded the place. Yeah, there are a lot of good places, and I'm not denying that. I've heard about the other places where there is maltreatment, but I don't think you should focus on that.
I guess I disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. I think we have to focus. Listen, I respect your point of view, and I'm glad you came on the show, and I want all points of view on this show. I respectfully disagree. I think that we have to focus on thousands of cases of people alleging brutal abuse, sexual abuse, torture, beatings, denial of food, denial of water, denial of sleep, locked in isolation. I got to tell you, we investigated Abu Ghraib.
Way overboard, and
I don't, sir.
I don't disagree that places like that may exist, but that's not the essential.
I'm not even trying to argue it's typical.
Psychiatrists also.
I'm not even trying to argue it's typical, but what I'm trying to argue is that this is not a case of 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000. It's a case of thousands. Like I said, later on in the broadcast, I'm going to play my interview with the Government Accountability Office official who actually studied some of these thousands of allegations and found specifically a number of them. But
let me mention just one more thing.
Real quick. Yeah.
One of the programs of Synanon, which began in the Nevada State Prison, California had, in the California Correction Department, there are about 15 therapeutic communities right in the prison, which are working and helping convicts. I'm not arguing with you about any of these horror stories.
And I'm not arguing with you about the therapeutic ones that work. The reason I'm focusing on the horror stories is because, again, I don't think these are isolated cases. I think they're widespread. And the one thing that I'm really glad that we agree on is there needs to be strict federal regulation of these programs so that we don't have, for example, cases where kids are not allowed to talk to their parents except through 6-minute monitored sessions like they had in the Soviet Union. I mean, I assume you agree.
I agree with you.
Right, okay.
I agree with you. Any atrocity like that should be investigated.
Well,
just like, what's the guy who just went to prison for raping 12-year-olds and in the name of religion? There are such things.
The polygamist,
no question about it.
Well, I appreciate you calling in and taking on my hard questions, and I appreciate your sharing your experience. Thank you so much, Professor.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Nicole in Woodland Hills, California. Hi, Nicole.
I'm on.
Oh.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so
despite
much.
this issue.
Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
I called in yesterday. I'm a straight survivor in 1990. I was the one that jumped out of the window. I was there for a total of 4 days, and my psychologist was able to come and rescue me.
Right, you told that story right as we were closing up. Yep.
Right, and what I wanted to also say that while I was at the psychiatric hospital, there was a team of social workers that came from Sacramento, from our state capital, and they took my testimony, and reports of abuse were filed. 1 month later, in 1990, they were ordered by the Department of Social Services to shut down because of my testimony, and also my psychologist testified.
And you should be an inspiration to everyone else listening into this broadcast, because when abuse happens, and again, there are people like Professor Lebonsky who are focusing on all the ones that work that aren't abusive. But in doing so, no one should discount the real abuse that happens. And like you said, when you report it, and it takes courage, and I understand it takes courage, and some people suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome, and some people are brainwashed into not speaking out. I get all that. But when you do have the courage to report as you did, Nicole, something did happen. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, and I got a lot of flack. I remember I was like in a movie theater after this had happened, and I had to go move into a friend's house, and it really kind of turned my life upside down. And what happened is that I ran into some straight alumni, and they shunned me, and they said, you're so evil for doing all of this, because they knew that I was the one that was shutting them down. Ironically, what had happened is that all the remaining kids in that program, they were put on an airplane, and they shipped them to Florida straight and also to Texas straight. So even though the state of California stepped in and heard my testimony and shut down California,
they still ship them to other places. Amazing.
The parents still, they said, well, you have to save your child's life, you have to put your kids into a different state.
That's
and
terrible.
Once the kids go into a different state, the state of California no longer has jurisdiction or authority to help kids out of state.
Nicole, thank you for sharing again. Yeah. I got to take another break. You called in yesterday, so I do need to move on. But thank you so much for all you've done for the cause. I can't thank you enough. 888-653-7543. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. This is Mark Levine talking to kids, actually adults now, but people who were abused as children in these residential treatment centers, trying to help them get off drugs or deal with troubled situations. That's what they're supposed to do. But as we're learning, they often didn't end up that way. Jody in San Francisco, California. How are you?
Hello, this is Jody. I'm actually from Anaheim, California.
Anaheim, excuse me. Yes, I apologize.
Not a problem. I'm the president and founder of SIA organization.
Yes.
And that stands for Survivors of Institutional Abuse.
Okay.
But I'm also a survivor. And to a school that was in Ramona, San Diego, and it was raided and closed down by the FBI in 1991. But when they closed, they moved the school from Ramona to Florida, where the rules were lax.
So this is the same thing we were hearing from Nicole, is that even though they shut it down in California, they just moved to Florida. They just moved somewhere else.
Exactly. And the guy that headed up the school, it's a Christian reform school. He actually became the president of FACA, which is the accrediting body, supposing accrediting body for these types of schools. And so really he wasn't answering to anybody but himself.
And so when it moved to Florida, did people start challenging it in Florida too? Were the Florida officials less sympathetic than the California ones?
It was actually picketed by a survivor who claimed that the guy who headed up raped her. There's been several testimonies given that the school it's actually changed its name. So what they do is, if they're getting bad publicity, bad press, they end up changing their name. The guy who headed up the school when I was there no longer is allowed to be around children. But they have another guy in there right now, which I don't know anything about, so I can't really comment to the school as its present condition now.
So, you have an organization. It's SIA, Survivors of Institutional Abuse. And
that's right.
How many complaints have you heard from people all across the country?
Thousands upon thousands.
Just to your organization, thousands.
Yes. Our organization really is an advocate for the survivor and really bringing survivors together and raising awareness for this type of abuse because it's swept under the carpet.
It is. Hang on with me, Jody. I'm going to get to you at the top of the hour. There's so many people who've called in, but I want to finish up with you, Jody, find out how people can help stop this abuse. We'll be right back at the top of the hour. Welcome back to the show. This is Mark Levine. We're talking about torture, abuse, beating, sexual assault, denial of food and water and sleep, putting little children in boxing rings with people larger than them to beat them up, brainwashing, psychological abuse, isolation chambers. One woman described yesterday how she was a woman, but she was a girl at the time, how she was kept in the corner for 3 months. People have described children beating other children. These are going on not in Syria. It may be going on in Syria too. I've actually condemned what's going on in Syria very explicitly. But it's not just Syria and Iran. It's not just Libya. It's right here in the United States. And it's happening to children. And I'm not saying that all residential therapeutic institutions are bad. I'm not saying that at all. I'm sure there are some that are positive. But this is enough of a problem that I think it warrants attention. Jody in Anaheim, California, you're the founder of Survivors of Institutional Abuse. Did I get that name right?
Yeah, Survivors of Institutional Abuse. That's
and your organization is SIA- tell me again so people can find you.
The website to get information for our organization is SIA-now.org. SIA-NOW.org. Okay. And we're holding a convention, and what we would like to do is bring all the survivors together in one large group to speak out and bring healing, but also awareness to this. And the convention is February 24th through the 26th, 2012, and it's going to be in Long Beach, California, on the Queen Mary. And there's a website for that, and the website is SIA-convention.org. And we want to get as many survivors there as possible, because the more numbers that we have, the better off we are as far as making change happen. So any survivor, any supporter of survivors out there, we need you. We need you to come down and support for this convention so that we can make change happen. This is a movement.
Let me ask you this, Jody. I assume you heard Professor Yablonsky. He's 86 years old. He was describing programs that worked. He seemed kind of clueless as to the ones that don't work. But he seems to me to represent a lot of people out there who say, Alcoholics Anonymous works, and the program that he was involved in back in the 60s works. And, well, he doesn't know about straight and WASP. He's sure that there are some that are bad. He's sure, like, Christianity can be abused. But he seems to suggest these are isolated instances. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say to that is I actually was listening when he was speaking, and he was talking about the Phoenix House and a few other things that are in correctional facilities, and that is all for adults. And what we're talking about here is children. And when children are taken against their will and put in seclusion or isolation, taken away from their family and not being able to communicate with them, there is a definite problem. That is kind of your alert, your red flag should be going up saying, okay.
He seemed to concede that was a problem when you're not allowed to talk to your parents. I pushed him on it, and he conceded that. And you're right. So the things that he was saying that were working were prison situations for adults, which is very different from these residential treatment centers for children. Good point.
And the reason why I know that is because my brother, who he was over the age of 18, he was actually in prison, and he was sent to the Phoenix House as part of his rehabilitation. And so a lot of these programs that are for adults, they've already gone through the gamut being a child, and they're put in these, rehabilitation centers. And I'm not saying they work, or I'm not saying that they don't, but, doing this to a child versus an adult are two very different things. And,
a child isn't fully formed. They don't know what's right and wrong, and suddenly you're telling them that everything they thought was right is wrong. People were telling me yesterday that they learned that telling the truth got them in trouble, and lying and scheming and pretending to convert to various religions, that got them rewarded. So they didn't know what was up and what was down.
And also, a child is still developing during these years,
Sure.
Anywhere from 11 on up to 18. And so their developmental process is skewed. And, they have a hard time trusting. There's a lot that goes into it because they've been betrayed as a child. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to take place, and there's not a lot of places out there that know how to help these people. Luckily, there are organizations such as Restoring Dignity and Heal, and also there's several Facebook groups. One to mention is SAW, Survivors Against WASP.
There's also the Survivors of Straight Inc. I've been talking with them too. A lot of the people who suffered through Straight's been closed down, but they are very much committed to helping people in WWASP and Elan and Hepzibah, all these different organizations. By the way, Rock Longpei is going to come in, the founder of Restoring Dignity. He's going to be on a little bit later in this hour. So I hope that all of you can combine together. All of you were sort of abused in slightly different ways, and you have slightly different organizations. But it sounds to me like you're all on the same side, which is working to shut these abusive institutions down and to regulate them so that they don't pop up again.
Yes, that's correct. You know, where I was actually at, this was 20 years ago that I was there, but the place is still in operation in Florida.
Oh.
And they did the isolation, they did the corner, they did where children were supervising children. I myself I was put in something called a get right room, which was essentially a closet with a locked door. And I had to remain there. And the reason why I was put there, not because I was combative, not because I was hitting anyone, because I forgot my pencil at school. That is why I was put into isolation. So they systematically break you down and then build you up according to what they want you to believe and what they want you to know to be truth. It's brainwashing.
I got to tell you, Jody, it's the same thing, and I'm someone who studies world history. This is the things that Hitler Youth did. This is the things that Charles Taylor did in Liberia, where he would kill kids' parents and then induct them into his child military. These are things that terrorists do regularly. These are things that were done in North Korea camps. These things should not be done to American children, and I am fully on board. In any way I can help, I will. Jody, thank you very much for calling in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely, and we're not leaving this issue. We will come back. This is an issue we're going to keep exploring until regulation stops these things from happening. Thank you so much for calling in. All right, let's see. We've got Susan, I believe, in Lexington, Virginia. Hi, Susan.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Now, this happened to your son. Your son was put in one of these places?
Well, our son that we adopted was put into one when he was in foster care, and was when he knew our other son. They were best friends growing up, and that's how we got to know him. And we're not aware of what was going on. And when we got in touch with him again, he had already had his ankle fractured. We were battling with the DSSs here in Virginia, trying to get him out of this situation. And finally, they took custody away, our local judge, from our DSS office after the facility. The staff there had thrown him to the ground and broke out his teeth.
Now tell me this: is this your son? Is this someone that you did not know before he was put in this place?
We knew him. We knew him. He had grown up down the street from us.
I see.
And was friends with my other son, and so we were trying to get custody.
And his mother or father? Were they gone? Did they put him there?
Yeah, he was in foster care. I think one of the things that I hear you, and I'm just sort of sitting here like going a little bit crazy, I think you're comparing apples and oranges. The elderly gentleman that you had on was talking about treatment facilities for drug addiction and stuff like that.
Right.
I think there's some things like that are like a 30-day program, a 60-day program. That can possibly work. It can also be abusive, but I'm very supportive of something like that with children with those issues and adults. What we're talking about here is these facilities where they lock up children until the money runs out. I mean, there is no end point. Nobody really ever gets out. And the facilities that we've been involved with recently and that I'm advocating for families here in Virginia, there's an organization, a huge corporation called Universal Health Services, UHS, who is the largest national provider of residential treatment centers in the country. So I know that you're talking about all these other facilities. They're small potatoes, and UHS just flies under the radar because they have enough money to pay off everybody. The children that go into their facilities, I hear about parents that are paying $40,000, $50,000 a year. Our tax dollars are being spent to pay $1,000 a day for children to be in facilities that are owned by Universal Health Services.
I'll tell you, later on in the broadcast, I'm going to play my interview with the government accountability official who investigated this, Greg Kutz, and he said that the costs range between $3,000 a month, which is $40,000 a year, and $13,000 a month, which is some $140,000 a year, where parents pay these organizations to torture their children.
But many of these children are going into facilities, the ones owned by Universal Health Services. They're being paid with tax dollars by Medicaid because the children what they're targeting is not drug issues, but children that are in foster care. They're targeting children who have autism, and they're targeting children who have mental retardation, intellectual disability.
One of the things I'm going to explore also...
Our son out, he was in a facility that only was licensed for children with intellectual disabilities. He'd been there for 2 years, and no one noticed that he was gifted. I went in and they started talking to me and said, "Oh, you've got to understand he's limited." It's like, hell no, I don't have to. I have a master's degree in education. That child's not limited unless you've been beating him on the head, which it turned out they were doing, but it didn't hurt him. in that way. And so all these issues, when we got there, they were describing all these horrible things, and he's a dangerous child and he needs to be locked up. It's like, maybe not. But I think once they broke his teeth out, that was the deal breaker. And we had a very brave judge who took custody away from DSS and gave us complete and final custody. And he continues to struggle with the issues with post-traumatic stress disorder
sure he does.
from these placements.
How old is he now?
There was never anything wrong with him.
How old is he now?
He's 20 now.
He's 20 now, and when he was in this place, how old was he?
He was 14, 15, 16.
14, 15, 16. So right in terms of adolescence, you have a gifted child who's being beaten on the head and having his teeth knocked out and told he's slow when he's actually gifted.
Not educated.
Have
that
you...
Everything he does is wrong because they won't let them out, and that's what I think gets missed.
Well, Susan, what have you done? I'm a Virginia resident myself. I live just outside Washington, D.C., so I say I'm in Washington, D.C. Technically, I'm a Virginia resident. What did you do? I want to hear that the people who knocked his teeth out and beat his head against the wall, I want to hear that they're in prison. Did you try to did you go to the DA? Did you go to the Attorney General of Virginia? Did you say, I want these people prosecuted?
Well, we called the state police in when it happened. The night it happened, he was able to get a message to me. I was working on my doctorate then and had to drop out after we got custody of him, which is fine. But I remember coming home that night, and the other kids were just hysterical, that he had been hurt. And I called the state police, and the guy said,
Good for you.
The trooper said, I will go in and put my eyes on him tonight. And he did, but then when he went back the next day, his mouth was so swollen, and we didn't have custody then. We were told that we did not have a legal presence in his life at that time. And so when they went in to talk to him, he couldn't speak. We found out later that someone had stolen his medication because they refused to give him anything but ibuprofen.
Tell me this. You are now his adopted parent. You are his legal guardian. Have you taken legal action? Have you focused on criminal prosecutions? Can we get these people in prison?
We can't because, like I said, the state police came in and he wouldn't speak to them. I mean, he kept saying, I'm fine, I feel safe, I'm not concerned.
It's too late now?
Once we got custody,
yeah.
I don't know because Virginia just changed. The General Assembly, God bless them, did a few things this past year, and one of them is that if there's sexual assaults involved, then there's an extremely extended period where you can file. If certain abuses have occurred, then you might be able to do it. But what happens a lot of times with families when these children get out, they don't have issues that they had before. I mean, there weren't really any issues.
Right.
The issues they're dealing with is
and most of them want to probably just
escape
the trauma.
Full time. But yes, I think we should start doing more legal.
I think so, Susan.
I think that's the answer. One thing that has happened in Virginia that I think you were talking about before about parents looking into situations and trying to find out about these facilities. In Virginia, they weren't posting the information online. We have Department of Behavioral Health, and so the General Assembly this past year, Governor McDonald did pass, despite taking lots of money from these people, he passed a bill saying that we would have to start posting the investigations and the problems online so that everybody
I'm glad to hear it.
can see them.
I'll tell you this, Susan.
Good thing. I have a website.
Yeah, real quick.
Very small compared to what everyone else has.
Okay.
Called Keep an Eye on PSI and UHS that post a lot of these stories.
And by the way, anytime, feel free to go to my website, go to marklevineradio.com or marklevine.tv, same place, and post in the comment section your website, and that way people who didn't hear that URL real quick will be able to find you if they need you, particularly people who are local in Virginia. I'll tell you, Susan, this reminds me a lot of, frankly, of rape victims and child abuse victims. Most of these victims do not want to testify, or women who are beaten by their husbands, they don't want to testify because they're afraid and they just want the situation to go away. But
they just want to get out.
A few extremely brave victims of rape and child abuse do speak out, and their perpetrators go to jail. And I'm not knocking the people that don't. I understand they're afraid. But the people that do, they are my real heroes because they are getting these criminals, putting them behind bars, and making sure that this doesn't happen to others. So I would encourage, and again, I don't mean this personally to you, Susan, but really to everyone out there. I know it takes tremendous courage, and I know I haven't been suffered myself, and I don't want to, but at the same time, if we can get these people behind bars, it will not only help your situation, but it'll help keep other kids from being abused, and just possibly it will get the attention that this issue needs. Thank you so much for calling in, Susan. I really do appreciate it.
And I would appreciate if you'd remind people again. I know we're talking about a lot of facilities, some that are closed, but UHS, Universal Health Services, is the largest provider in this nation.
And we're going to talk about that because I think there's some connections to Mitt Romney that we're going to approach later on in the broadcast.
Oh, Rick Santorum, Governor Tim Kaine from here, and Obama. And one of the reasons you don't have either side making it an issue, they're both guilty.
Because they're paying all those politicians. I hear you. Thank you so much for calling in, Susan.
Right,
I appreciate it. Next up is Nick Gaglia. Now, he has made films on Gaglia, excuse me. He's made I'm mispronouncing his name. He has made films on the troubled teen industry. We're going to talk to him when we come back. Welcome back to the show. This is Mark Levine. We're focusing on the abuse of teens that's happening and children, younger children, all across the country in residential treatment centers. My next guest is Nick Gaglia. He has made 2 films on this industry. One of the reasons why we have very little time before the next commercial break is because I've been trying to listen to everyone. All of you are so powerful and your stories are so strong, and I'm trying to get to all of you. And what that means is that I tend to run up hard against commercial breaks. So, Nick, I'm not even going to introduce you because we have to take another break. But at the top of the next 3 minutes, we're going to get to Nick Gaglia. He's going to tell us about the films he's devoted to this. And then after that, we've got Rock Longpay, the founder of Restoring Dignity, an organization that helps the people who survive this institutional abuse. You don't want to miss this. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the abuse of teens and children. You probably don't even know this is occurring, but there are thousands of cases all across the country. It dates back to the 70s, and it's going on today. And my next guest not only suffered through one of these facilities, but has done 2 films about them. Nick Gaglia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Mark, how are you, my friend? Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I got to tell you, my lines are overwhelmed. Everyone wants to get their story, and I'm not going to be able to get to everyone, and I've done 6 hours on this. You've studied, I assume, not just your own experience, but lots of other people's in preparation for your films, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My first film, Over the GW, is loosely based on my experience in one of these places. I was in there. I was in a place called Kids in North Jersey from age 14 to 17. It was a drug rehab. It was a derivative of straight. It was a drug rehab in New Jersey, and they basically wanted everyone there to dedicate their lives to the program. They told me the things that I loved the most growing up when I was a kid, that I couldn't have them in my life if I wanted to be sober. Like certain family members, like my father, and filmmaking.
Nick, how did you get in the program? So many people have described it. Parents, was it your parents, or what happened to you?
Yeah, my thing is I was on drugs. I needed help, and my parents found this place. And the way they market to the parents is they find out, they ascertain exactly what the parents are looking for, and that's what they cater to. So my family didn't have a lot of money, and this was a place that claimed to be the only program in the world that could keep your kids sober, and if they ever left, they would die. And
you saw what?
Obviously wanted to help me.
Sure. You saw what? Physical abuse, mental abuse, psychological abuse. What did you witness?
Yeah, I mean, I experienced all of that. I was restrained on the floor, physically abused, well over 100 times, and
wow.
I never even hit someone. I was never a violent person. There was even a moment of sexual abuse. There was verbal abuse, and then of course the worst thing was the mind control, the brainwashing.
Tell me about that, because a lot of people have mentioned that was actually worse than the physical abuse. How did that work?
The psychological, I mean, it's still hard to describe, but what they're doing is they're sticking these, it's like 1984. It's like Orwell's 1984. They're controlling, they have complete control over the milieu, and they're sticking in your head exactly what they want you to think and believe, which is this is the only place in the world that will keep you alive, and if you leave, you will die. So
sounds exactly like the cults that I've heard about, whether it's at Scientology or Moonies or any of these cults that adults, but of course, as a child, you're even more susceptible to that kind of thing.
Yeah, and what they're doing is 24/7. You can't look out the window. You're in this one room all the time, and they're sticking these memes in your head. These viruses of the mind, and they're saying there were kids in there. I remember there was one girl who she went in when she was 11. She never even did a drug. The worst thing she ever did was masturbate. If that's even wrong or bad, which it isn't.
It isn't.
And they're sticking in everyone's head. These memes. You're a drug addict. You're doomed. If you leave, you will die. You have to be here. Yada yada yada. And when you're 13, 14, you're going through puberty, and if you put drugs on top of that, then things get really confusing, and then you're in this place that that they're sticking these memes in your head, and you don't. You're
sure.
Totally
Nick,
confused.
tell me about your movies. Did they explore this brainwashing?
Yeah, the first one, Over the GW, was completely about the brainwashing.
Over the GW. I just wanted to make sure people hear. It's like the George Washington Bridge, I assume, right? Over the GW.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Exactly. Over the GW stands for the George Washington Bridge, and the main focus is the brainwashing. I actually, I watered down the other aspects of it, like the physical abuse and whatnot.
Because it was too harsh? You didn't think people could handle looking at it?
Yeah, I knew that it was a funny I was trying to find the right balance, and I didn't want to make it too hard for a survivor to watch the film. And, I'll put it to you this way. At one of our screenings, the general public was like, that was a great film, but you must be exaggerating because it couldn't have been that rough. And then,
of course, it was worse.
Someone sitting next to him, a survivor of one of these places, was like, I really love the film. However, that's the watered-down version of what we, what we experienced.
Now, you did a second film, too. Tell me about that.
Second film is called Aaron Bacon. It's based on this kid, Aaron Bacon's story. He was in a wilderness program. So the place I was in was indoors. This is like the other side of the story. And, he was in this program in the wilderness for 30 days. And if you saw a Polaroid of what he looked like at the end of the 30 days, he lost so much weight, worst of the worst, Auschwitz, I'm telling you. And at the end of that 30 days, he died. So from what I experienced, where kids were just being abused and getting screwed up, now I found out, kids are actually dying in these places. I just can't fathom you have... you have a student bring a gun to Virginia Tech and
right.
kill a dozen people. It's national media.
But this isn't getting attention. Nick, tell me this.
These all the time, but nothing.
Where can people get your films?
Well, they can watch them for free. I actually post them online. If you go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/NGAGLIA. They're also available through my website, nickalia.com, and they're available on Amazon and anywhere, Blockbuster, Best
Again, I have this site right in front of me. It's NICKGAGLIA.com. Nick, you could also post it. I think I have your name on my website. If not, I'll make sure that I do before the end of the broadcast so that people can find these films. How did you end up taking your horrific circumstances and make them into, why did you decide to make films about it? A lot of people want to run away from these horrors.
I always knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, and in the program they told me I couldn't. I got out, and then it took a bunch of years, and then I found some clarity, and, it just felt like the right first film for me to do. I knew that the general public, nobody knows these places exist, and I believe in edutainment, educating through entertainment. Anyone will go watch a film, and, it was just a cathartic experience for me. It felt like it was important.
I'll tell you, it is important, and the work you're doing is tremendous, and I want to encourage everyone to check out Nick's films, and I'm sorry I could talk to you all day as well. There's so many people that want to tell their stories. Nick, thank you so much for spending this time with us tonight.
Yes, Mark, thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you. My next guest is Rock Longpay. He is the founder of RestoringDignity.org. I'm going to take a quick break before I get to him. But Rock has been focused on helping survivors like Nick, like all these other people that you've heard. He's up in Canada, and there's some different circumstances there. We're going to get to Rock, and then at the top of the hour, my interview with Greg Kutz, the Government Accountability Officer, the guy working for the federal government of the United States who studied these institutions. Stick around. There's a lot more to come. My next guest is Rock Longpay. He contacted me way back, frankly, when Marcus Chatfield first suggested doing this program. Rock is up in Canada, actually. He's up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. But this is not a problem that only affects the United States. It's a problem that affects Canada, too. And his organization, Restoring Dignity, does a lot to help the victims of this institutional abuse. Rock, thank you so much for coming here on the show.
Mark, it is an honor to be on air tonight with you. And I just want to open... because I want to just applaud all the survivors who have come on air over the last little while, and your last program as well, I guess a couple of years back. I think these
and yesterday night
should
too.
all be applauded. Their courage is phenomenal.
It is phenomenal, and I'm very, very proud of them, and I'm just so sorry that I can't give everyone 3 hours because I know all of you need that time to tell your stories, and I'm trying to move through people, so please apologize if I have each and every individual who doesn't get in today. I'm not letting this go. We are going to have more shows on this until this practice is finally ended. Now, Rock, you are up in Canada. They have these problems in Canada too.
They do. In fact, I just want to speak a little bit that there are multiple forms of institutional child abuse, and the segment of what we're mostly talking about tonight is teen facilities, or facilities for teens that are troubled teens. But there are a variety of forms in the United States, in Canada, and all over the world. This is not a phenomenon just to America or in any era. It's been going on for 4 centuries at least that we date back in our research. So people need to know about that history. And here in Canada, we've had some horrible cases. One of the most prolific ones has been the Duplessis orphans. These were a group of people that were placed in orphanages in the beginning, and they were physically and sexually abused in the orphanage. It was run by the Catholic Church. Later on, the government stripped funding from them for these programs, and so they got the idea, or they realized that the federal government was giving funding for mental health issues. So they began putting phony labels on the kids, and they were performing such things as lobotomies on these children. Some of them were disabled, and the stories are horrific of not just even violence and sexual abuse, but also of drownings and murder of children in these facilities.
Rock, let me ask you this. You heard about an hour ago Professor Yablonsky from University of California. And he says, well, you know, some of these programs are really good. Phoenix House, he mentioned, a facility in prisons. And these other things, well, you know, anything can go wrong. I mean, you know, he said Christianity can go wrong. Anything can go wrong. There's all kinds of isolated cases. But, you know, he's not going to attack therapeutic residential facilities because, you know, the ones that he's familiar with, and he's 86, and he's, you know, he's talking about things that were 20, 30 years ago, they work fine. Now, I asked him if he'd heard of straight ink, and he hadn't, which surprised me. He's supposed to be an expert. How do you respond to someone like Professor Yablonsky?
Well, I want to be fair and balanced here. So I'll just say, first of all, I want to applaud his courage to come on air and speak. I think that was courageous.
It was, considering my clear views on this, which are well known. And I should say, by the way, that Cliff Brownstein, the executive director of a trade association for these things, I asked him to come on. And he refused to come on. He said he didn't have enough time to prepare. He knew about it as early as Monday. I specifically invited him Wednesday afternoon. He said, you know what, 2 days is not enough time to prepare. He needs empirical studies. I said to him in an email exchange, I said, look, you're supposed to be the executive director of the National Association of these groups. How hard can it be to find people who've had positive experiences? How hard? You should have those empirical studies at your fingertips. No, he needs more time. So I promised him that when he's ready, I'm going to do another show on this.
Them as well. Just ask them hard-hitting questions like that. So this is not uncommon for them, and he's likely wanting to consult with his lawyers.
I'm sure he is. So tell me how you respond, Professor Yablonsky. And listen, I didn't necessarily disagree with Professor Yablonsky. I mean, he focused on the ones that worked, and he didn't seem to know the ones that didn't work. And
well,
I'm not.
I don't agree with him at all.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead.
And there's a few reasons, but I want to just put in perspective the age of the man and the era that he grew up in. Now, Tenor of the Times does not justify any of what happened, but that's kind of the era he comes from, the mentality that I think he comes from, and that's just my opinion. But I will say that we know, and science and research is showing, that institutions cannot be the parents for children, period. They're not conducive to their personal development. Even before abuse begins, they're not conducive to their development. We've known this for a long time. And if this professor was really researched, he would have looked and seen those things. The other thing that we need to speak about is, in asking all of these facilities, is speaking to the issue, or a coin term of best evidence-based practice, which is a term that they use under the DSM, which is the model, or not model, but the Bible for mental health diagnosis, that you have to, there's a best evidence-based practice that has to be focused in any of these care facilities, and they're not. The science and research is there. They're ignoring it. A lot of these facilities in the U.S. are profit, focused, that more than anything. And there's in a lot of these facilities in the U.S. and even in Canada, historically around the world, many of these facilities either don't have the proper facility or the proper funding for one reason or another. That may be one purpose or reason, but for the most part, they don't have properly trained professionals working in these facilities, and it makes these environments ripe for abuse. And
let me ask you this, Rock.
If they have a lack of funding, it's again another risk factor.
You say you profoundly agree with Professor Yablonsky. Tell me specifically what you think he got wrong.
Well, I'll just read a quote here.
Okay.
From 1969, the professor of Australia's psychological medicine at Monash University, Dr. Ironside, stated at a child abuse seminar, "Future social historians will look back at this age as one in which the affluent societies, at least children, were paradoxically deprived of their birthright in spite of increasing knowledge of the developmental requirements for healthy, emotional, mental, and personality growth. The future social historians will also note that the legislation aimed at improving services for young people in need not only failed its praiseworthy objective, but paradoxically contributed to the future deprivation for vulnerable children." So that's 1969. This man should have read that. This is before the era where he was studying. So these are all things that are available to us academically, and they're online. They're linked up all over the world.
Now,
so
these
things are there. So I don't buy his arguments at all.
Fair enough. Now, I understand there is actually a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, against WWASPS, which is one of the worst groups that continues to this day. This is the Wilderness Camp, right? Am I getting that right?
Correct, yeah.
And these are the ones like we just heard Nick Alia talk about Aaron Bacon, who was left 30 days in wilderness, and it killed him. I understand it's 350 students and 150 parents in a class action. This is called the Turley lawsuit, Turley.
That's correct, yeah.
Now, can anyone join this? Anyone who's been in WWASP or a parent? Because let's take them down. I mean, I want to see criminal prosecutions, but heck, a class action, that's pretty good.
It's difficult for the parents to get involved somewhat. Law firms often kind of move away from that because they're not direct victims. They could. I mean, you have to. I mean, you're a lawyer, Mark. You would
Yes.
know that in order to establish a tort or a claim, there has to be a cause of action.
Right, a
How
commonality
did they
of
suffer?
interest.
How did they suffer
Right.
economically or otherwise?
Right.
And so that's where the damages come in. And the victims themselves, the kids, are the direct victims.
Right,
So
but parents,
families
if the
are harder to
if
get
the
in.
children want to fight back, and again, I said this earlier, I know it takes tremendous courage to fight back, but notwithstanding that courage that it takes, and I'm not judging anyone who doesn't, but my real heroes are the people who do fight back, whether they're rape victims or, frankly, Holocaust survivors, whoever's been through this horror. It's very hard to fight back, but if you do, I think it actually gives people courage and a voice, and most importantly, it stops the abuse from happening to others. So
there are a lot of problems with the lawsuits too, Mark, and I don't want to get people all sort of jawed up and really optimistic about lawsuits, because that's, at the end of the day, all these individuals have to go back to their homes and their lives and live their lives. And
so,
the
Rock,
reality
what should they do?
in your country and in Canada and most countries is that many of these victims are living in abject poverty with no family, no government, no one there to support them, and they're struggling. You had a gentleman online last night, Tony. He's really struggling. Yeah. And there are so many victims like this, and my heart goes out to all of them. And we, as an organization, there are so many survivors, literally millions in every country, that are waiting. We've heard quotes from thousands, but really it's in the millions in every country.
And your organization is an international. This is an international organization, right? Restoring Dignity.
We study this issue all over the globe, and we look at the historical aspects of it. Yes.
Okay, so if someone is suffering, and there are lots of people obviously who are suffering, should they contact your organization? What can you do to help people?
They absolutely should contact us, and what we can do is put them in touch with other sources and experts that can assist them in terms of we have to look at and assess their file and see what's been involved in their history and what their needs are and assess what those needs are, and then put them in touch with the right people.
So they go to restoringdignity.org, I guess, to find that?
That's correct. Just a couple of things I want to mention, Mark, and that is first of all, I want to talk about the prone position. This is something that people were mentioning a lot in your discussions already. That's a face-down position where 2 or 3 people or staff will hold you down. And I want to say that in some areas, in a lot of areas, it's actually illegal. It's not ethically accepted because it's very, very lethal, because you suffocate people that way, and there's been a number of child deaths in these facilities using that position.
Right, time goes quickly. We only have about 30 more seconds. Give me one last thing that you want to really get across here.
Okay, I want to get across that we think that there is a way to resolve this problem, and that's a multi-dimensional foster care treatment program, and that is called the MTFC. They're online at mtfc.com, and this is a preventative model we're working on, and that we think can shut down the entire all these facilities. But I think America needs a national inquiry on child welfare, period. It's a huge issue. There's a lot of facilities and a lot of people that are suffering, and kids still in the system suffering. So that's one of the things you need to focus on. We're working with other groups for that, too.
Rock, thank you so much for your time. Actually, in terms of a national inquiry, there was one in 2007 and 2008. It was sponsored by Congressman George Miller, the one who has the bill to regulate these facilities. And I interviewed the person who did this study, Nick Cooks. You're going to hear that interview at the top of the hour. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. This is Mark Levine. I got to tell you, the time goes really fast. I devoted 6 hours to studying the abuse and torture of children and teens in the United States in these residential treatment facilities all across the nation. And I knew it wouldn't be enough, and it hasn't been enough. And so I apologize. A number of people are on the lines. I'm going to try to get to each and every one of you. I know a number of you tried to call in, and the lines are busy. I'm going to do the best I can. Before I get back to the phones, I do think it's important that you hear what the United States federal government has found about these things, because there always will be critics, people like Professor Yablonsky, who say, well, you know, these things work fine, and I just don't know about the other things. Well, there are some people who, like me, very much find persuasive all of the many people who've called into this show, who've talked to me on Facebook, who've posted on my website. To me, I see these hundreds of stories. They all sound very similar. They all sound awful, and I don't doubt any of you. But some want official studies. So I talked to a guy today that did an official study. This was a pre-taped interview that I did this morning. And I spoke with Greg Kutz. Now, he works for the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. This is the formal office of the federal government. When Congress wants a study, they do an objective study. It's not a partisan thing. It's not Democratic. It's not Republican. It's simply the facts. I want to play for you my interview with Greg Kutz, and also I want to let you know that the 2 studies that he did, I've posted on my site. Just go to marklevine.tv or marklevineradio.com. You got to refresh the page. You might want to do this after the show's over, and you will have links to those 2 studies that I talk about right now with Greg Kutz. Mr. Kutz, in 2007 and 2008, you drafted a report for the GAO on various residential treatment centers. Tell me how that came about. Why did you do that?
We did, as you mentioned, we started in 2007 looking at allegations regarding abuse and death of youth enrolled in residential treatment programs across the country. This was done for, at the time, the chairman of the House Education Labor Committee, George Miller. As you may know, there's hundreds of these established across the United States, although no one really knows how many there are. But we did look into programs that offered, in many respects, to transform the lives of very troubled youth. And they were called at that time wilderness therapy, boot camps, academies, boarding schools, and things like that.
And what did you find in your report?
We found a number of things. Looking through 1990 through 2008, we found thousands of allegations of death and abuse in the United States, many related to private programs. The data was actually combined private and public both. We found, and we drilled down on 18 cases that were adjudicated from 1990 to 2006, and mostly civil cases, and we found ineffective management had contributed to the death, and in many cases the abuse of children, mostly youth from the ages of 12 to 18. The kinds of things I'm talking about are hiring of untrained staff, lack of adequate nourishment, kids that were basically starved, negligent operating practices, and physical restraint that in some cases caused death. And this is mostly face-down physical restraint.
Now, did you hear about deprivation of sleep or locking people into rooms, not allowing them out for periods of time, refusing to let people use the bathroom, things like that?
There were cases of that, yes.
And part of the thing that people have talked about on this show is the fact that a lot of times the staff wouldn't be around. They'd allow the kids themselves to train or discipline, and in some cases harshly, other kids. Did you find that in your report?
There was at least one case like that where the counselors had the other kids punish someone who supposedly had done something wrong by beating them up, and that was one of the cases I do recall. And there may have been others, but I distinctly recall one where a youth had broken their arm, actually, and rather than provide medical attention, they actually had the other kids beat this kid up.
Okay, so Congressman Miller asked you to draft this report as head of the House Labor Education Committee. You did so. What were the results of this report? Did anything come out of it?
Well, again, we reported on 18 cases, and we found very troubling practices there. I think in one of the hearings I referred to these as human rights violations, the kind of things that you would find in a third world country happening in our country. In addition to the issues related to the death and abuse of the children, we found also deceptive marketing practices where some, and again, we don't know how many programs there are, we can't project our results beyond the cases we looked at, but some of these places took advantage of desperate parents who were looking for somewhat of a last-ditch effort to help what was a troubled child at that time.
And what were the results? So Congressman Miller asked you to do this report. You gave a very detailed report, at least on these 18 cases. I'm going to post it on my website so that people can take a look at it themselves. You had some hearings on it. What happened? I think the House passed a bill, Congressman Miller's bill, but it didn't get through the Senate to regulate these things?
That's correct.
So no congressional law was passed. Was anything done in the executive branch or anywhere else, local authorities, to look into these cases of abuse and to shut down some of these abusive treatment centers?
I think the primary positive result, in addition to Congress being more informed and the draft legislation, was just public awareness, and I think there's been an increased public awareness. The two hearings that were held, one in 2007 and one in 2008, did receive quite widespread attention. But whether anything has actually changed in the short term, I really don't know. And as you mentioned, consequences with respect to the individuals involved in abuse of children and in some cases death, there were 2 convictions in the 18 cases that we looked at, but the rest of the people, there were very few consequences to these acts.
Convictions of murder, torture?
There was one conviction for manslaughter and aggravated assault, and there was another for third-degree assault. One person served a number of years, and the other one got a month in prison. The rest of the people, there may have been some probation and community service, but mostly what we saw were civil settlements for anywhere from $200,000 to over $1 million.
And, of course, you looked into, I believe, hundreds or even thousands of allegations, right? I mean, it wasn't, you looked at 18 centers, but there were a large number of allegations, correct?
There were thousands of allegations. We drilled down on the 18 specific cases. You know, we looked at autopsy reports, police reports. We interviewed people, and we did all those kinds of things. And on the deceptive marketing, we did our own original undercover work, actually calling, posing as parents of troubled kids.
When you did that, what did they tell you?
Well, there were some interesting things. For example, in one case, we were told that they had a stringent application process. And the next thing you know, we didn't apply. We received an acceptance letter by email.
That's hardly a stringent process.
No. In another case, there was just one other case. There was an interesting. It was a referral service. A lot of these places have referral services or front companies that are doing marketing, and they kept referring our kids with different problems to the same school. As it turned out, the husband-wife, one was operating the referral service, the other was operating a school, and of course they weren't telling the people calling on the phone that this was actually one organization.
Nice. So when you did these reports, you raised some public awareness. Are you aware of some of these facilities being shut down, or are they still being run today?
Based on the last look, there were some that have been shut down. Whether it had a result from this or not, I don't know, but there were some that were still open. Again, I haven't looked in several years, so I don't know which of these may be open today. But some had already been closed when we started our work. Others were open then and have subsequently closed, and I believe there are still some open. And, you know, these people move around. Once they move from one place to another, unless they adequately disclose some of the past things, if there's no conviction, if someone does a background check, they're going to look clean. They're probably operating at other ones right now in some cases and maybe doing some of the same things.
Now, since Congressman Miller's bill didn't pass, is there no federal regulation of these facilities?
Generally, no. I mean, some of the actual deaths took place on federal land, and I don't really believe that the Forest Service and others that owned it were completely aware. So there's fees and usage charges and things like that. So there was some federal nexus on that, but no, there really, I don't think overall has been a change. Don't know if there are more or less of these places today.
Did you examine state regulators? Are they watching over these? Are any states particularly good or particularly bad in regulating these facilities?
For example, Utah, where some of the early programs started, had some incidents early on, and they then increased government oversight, state government, and regulations. So some of the states that had some of the early boot camps and other types of programs that actually had issues that were raised and got a lot of publicity did improve some of their processes. But you basically would have at least 50 sets of processes across the country, and within certain states perhaps even lower levels of oversight that vary.
Greg, last night and tonight we've been hearing just repeated witness accounts by people who are in these programs, and including some parents who right now are very concerned because their children are in these programs. And my question for you is, what can they do? What legal remedies do they have?
I don't know about legal remedies, but certainly they need to do significant due diligence on the front end as to who they're dealing with and what kind of I think actually the Federal Trade Commission put out a pamphlet on questions parents should ask when they are actually looking to hire one of these places. They have to be very careful before they put their child in these programs. The cost of these, when we were looking at it, was anywhere from $3,000 per month to $13,000 per month.
Okay, but I'm going to press you on this because there's some very anguished parents out there. They didn't do the due diligence they should have done, and certainly what you've said is a good lesson for people in the future. But it's not just parents, it's relatives. They know that in some cases, for example, a child, a niece or a nephew or a cousin has been signed over by parents who are not that competent to these facilities, who actually become their guardians, and they hear all these stories of abuse. What can they do? Can they go to the police? Can they go to their district attorneys? Can they go to their legislators, all of the above? They're really trying to find some answers here, and I'm hoping you can help me with that.
Well, all of those are certainly possibilities. I wish I could say there was a silver bullet and something that is real specific that can solve everyone's problems, but it's going to be case by case, and there is no real great solution for these problems except certainly on the front end. And if you find your child in one of these programs and, for example, the program won't let you talk to them on the phone, you get them out of there. There's certain things that should be in place for the parents to provide some assurance that their loved ones are being handled appropriately. And the stories of the 18 cases we looked at were absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, some of the things that we've been hearing in case after case, in fact, it's a repeated theme in all of these, is that the kids are not allowed to talk to their parents. In fact, sometimes they're only allowed a 6-minute monitored conversation, frankly, which reminds me of the way it used to work in the Soviet Union, where you couldn't call unless they monitored the phone calls. This cult-like behavior, isn't there a way that a parent or even a concerned relative can go to the authorities, go to the judge, call a crisis center and say, hey, if we can't freely talk to this child, that's abuse in and of itself, because a lot of times they can't prove what's going on inside because they can't freely talk to the child.
Right. I think it's going to vary state by state. As I mentioned, there's probably 50 sets of state regulations and rules on this. You're going to have to look at each state. But, yeah, you need to act quickly if there's signs that there's something going on with your child. And you're right. And actually, the bill you talked about that passed the House had provisions in there that required free access to the phones for kids in these camps. So that's something that if you find that that's not happening, that would be a red flag.
One last thing, a number of kids, they're now adults, but they tell me the stories what happened to them as kids, although some of them it happened to them just recently, young adults, tell me that they escaped the facilities, literally by doing things like jumping off roofs, breaking through windows, pulling fire alarms, extreme behavior, trying to escape what for them was worse than any prison camp. And in many cases, the police and others simply turned them back over to the same people who'd been abusing and torturing them. If someone gets free and calls 911, what can they say so that they don't get turned over to the very people that are torturing and abusing them? In other words, if they say 911, these people are abusing me, they are physically abusing me, is there a way that they can be protected and not sent back to the very people they claim are torturing them?
Well, absent going directly to your parents or your guardians, you would hope that law enforcement authorities would take seriously those kinds of allegations. You know, the kinds of the cases we saw, there was physical evidence of abuse. I'm talking about serious bruises, contusions, broken bones, etc. So you would think in the serious cases there's going to be physical evidence of the abuse. And in the cases we saw, I read the autopsy reports. I saw the pictures. I mean, it was gruesome. So I would hope that there's enough physical evidence in those cases. I mean, if it's just mental or some sort of emotional control type situation, that's going to be harder. But when there's physical abuse, there are cases we did see that there was evidence of that.
I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your work, and my hope is that this show and your work together will help persuade members of Congress this is something that really needs to be regulated. Thank you so much for coming on the air and talking with us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this for the parents and the kids.
Powerful stuff. I was thinking as I was listening that maybe child abuse centers that are used to hearing about parents that abuse their children, maybe they're the ones to call. I wish I had better answers, but I hope you appreciate the interview. When we come back, I've got a statement from Congressman Miller, who was unable to attend tonight but did leave a statement, and connections to Mitt Romney in all of these programs, and then more of your calls right after this. Welcome back to the show. So many people want to comment. So many people are on the phone. So many people are commenting on Facebook. This is a huge issue, and I'm just unable to get to all of you. One thing that I thought Greg Coots made clear was that a lot of these problems could be fixed if only Congressman Miller's bill would be passed, Congressman George Miller of California. And I spoke to his staff today. And they gave me a statement for him. I tried very hard to get him to come, and he really wanted to come. Unfortunately, he had a funeral today. But he writes, Mark, thank you for hosting this show. I'm deeply sorry I wasn't able to join you. I've been paying close attention to what happens at residential programs for troubled youth for years. There's a problem that unfortunately doesn't seem to ever go away. I first held hearings on the issue in 2007. Then we introduced legislation to set common sense minimum federal safety standards that states would need to adopt and enforce, and create easily accessible information for parents about the safety record of programs. The legislation passed the House with strong bipartisan support twice. By the way, I looked this up, and it did pass by a 2-to-1 margin. Democrats and Republicans together. It did not pass the Senate. And I can't see why. This is Mark Levine talking. Anyway, back to George Miller's statements. He talks about the media reports, about it's a long statement, so I'm going to summarize it. The media reports about the terrible abuses. He talked about the that some residential facilities do provide good services, but in many programs there's a culture of abuse and neglect, inadequate staff training, state oversight. He talked about the government study, Greg Cook's study, that deceives and misleads parents. He writes that parents deserve every assistance, every assurance that their child will be safe when attending a residential program. He goes on and on. He says he hopes his Republican colleagues will join me in putting an end to these horrific abuses. Let me tell you what you can do, because I used to work in Congress. You need to call your member of Congress. You need to call your senator, wherever you are in the United States. Call them. Write them. Call your member of Congress. Call your senator. Tell them to pass George Miller's bill. It's the bill to prevent abuse in these residential treatment centers. That is the strongest and quickest way we can shut down these abusive facilities once and for all. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about torture that would be found at Abu Ghraib, but is actually found right here in the United States, and it affects children. A lot of you are on the lines. I'm going to get right to your stories in just a second, but I do need to talk about what many argue is the leading presidential candidate on the Republican side. It's either him or Rick Perry. I'm talking about Mitt Romney, because the two founders of the two worst organizations, we know who they are if you've been listening yesterday and today. One is Mel Sembler, the founder of Straight Inc., and the other is Robert Litchfield. He is the founder of WWASPS, WASPs. We heard about this group. We heard about some of the horrible abuses at WASP camps just in this show. What do Robert Litchfield and Mel Sembler have in common? They're both co-chairs, financial co-chairs of the Mitt Romney campaign. In fact, the Romney's Utah finance co-chair is Robert Litchfield, and his national one is Mel Sembler. These people are raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for Mitt Romney. Now, do you think Mitt Romney, if he's elected president of the United States, is actually going to look into abuses against teens run by his two financial co-chairs? I think not. Sure, we can use lawsuits. Sure, we can use police. Sure, we can bring attention to this. But if we could just get Mitt Romney to disassociate himself from these two people, think what a tremendous good that would do for teens all across the country. He's running for president. Now's the time to get him. If you wait till he is president, it's too late. So we got to pass Congressman Miller's bill. That's one thing on your agenda, absolutely. Call your member of Congress. Do it this Monday. Don't forget. Do it this week. Ask your member of Congress to co-sponsor George Miller's bill to protect teens in residential treatment centers. Ask your senator to file a bill doing that. That's very important. It's also important to get the word out about Mitt Romney. He needs to be embarrassed about these people. If he's not, then he's likely to, well, let's just face it, let's further these programs. There's more, though. There's more. I'm told that Mitt Romney, that he himself, through Bain Capital, the venture capital firm that he owns, that it owns CRC Health Group, which owns Aspen Education Group, which is spun out of the Mount Bachelor Academy that closed down, closed by the Oregon Department of Health and Human Services for its abuses. I'm told he's connected with Sinanan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is the one that Yablonsky approved of, but many people argue is something that became a cult that used violence. They're all connected here. And whether it's the Seed or Straight or WASP, any of these organizations, they all seem to lead back to Mitt Romney. Now, I don't have, I've done a little bit of research on this. I am not the expert. I'll tell you who's one of the great experts is Maya Solovich. She was my guest yesterday. She has written a really powerful article in Reason.com that details exactly all the connections between Mitt Romney and these groups. I have linked to it on my website at marklevine.tv, marklevineradio.com. Check it out and spread the word. Because some people, let's face it, some media organizations are mostly focused on politics. They think politics is sexier than abuse of teens. Frankly, I think the abuse is the thing that needs to be discussed. But whatever it is, this might just capture their attention. They just had a whole discussion of Rick Perry and whether or not he required women to have the HPV virus vaccine for girls in Texas. Well, Mitt Romney has people doing torture who are financing his campaign. It's time for him to disown them, and in doing so, it will bring tremendous attention. And that attention from the national media, that spotlight, that could be just a spotlight that shines, that shuts a lot of these down. So all I ask you to do, go to my website when the show's over, take Maya's wonderful article, and spread it around. One last thing, Rock Longpay wanted me to let you know that Restoring Dignity is also on Facebook. You can check it out there. And he also mentions that don't forget the traumatic brain injury among survivors. We've heard so many stories of people who's had their heads bashed in and their faces bashed in. And, of course, this is the kind of thing that can lead to concussions and long-term traumatic brain injuries. He wanted me to mention that on the air. All right, I'm going to get back to you and your stories now. Some of you have been holding on a very long time. Jesse in San Francisco, California, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you doing, Mark?
I'm okay. Thank you for calling in and being on hold so long. Tell me what happened to you.
Well, I was in a bunch of different facilities in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'd been put into kind of behavioral health facilities for a while. My father had just died. I was having a lot of problems at home. My mother was dating somebody who was in prison for a double homicide, and I didn't feel safe, and I had no family to go to, so I left. And I was picked up for being an underage runaway. I was sent to one wilderness program where the first thing they did was make me strip all my clothes off in the middle of the night in the desert in front of a car with its headlights on while one of the men from the program sat inside the bed of the car.
Oh my
and
God.
The next day I started my period, and instead of giving me any tampons or sanitary napkins, they let me bleed all over myself for about 4 days.
Wow.
I retaliated. I tried to get out of there. I ended up walking about 40 miles in one day to try and leave. And it wasn't until I threatened to break the window of a car, because I would rather be in jail than be there, that they took me and they put me into a different lockdown facility in Texas, where I was denied medical attention, and I almost died from that. And
Jesse,
there's more of it.
You're so brave to tell all this.
Yeah, there are a couple more facilities to throw in. I stayed at the place in Texas for about 4 months, and they let me out. You usually were there a year, and it seemed really weird to me that they would let me out. They put me to a secured halfway house. There was a, sister house with them, and I left after a couple of weeks, jumping out of a second-story window. I later found out that the reason that I was only there for 4 months is because they ran out of money to pay for me, and it was actually my college trust fund that my father had left to me that they were paying for. They completely decimated, cleared out my trust fund paying for all these places over the years. And I was picked up again in Portland, and then I went to the worst facility that I was at in all my years in Utah. When the escorts came to take me because I refused to get on the plane, I was trying to find every legal recourse that I possibly could. I would rather stay in juvenile hall than be taken where they were going to take me. When they did come and get me, I got into an argument with one of the guys who was taking me. It was a husband and wife team. And to deal with it, he pulled the car over to the side of the road and came in the back and choked me with the forearm of his arm. I had the cops called twice on them while they took me from Oregon to Utah, and both times, even though they had no identification or anything, they just told them that they were authorized to take me. The cops just let them go. And then I was taken to the facility for about 8 months. And in my time that I was there, I saw a lot of abuse going on with other kids, physical abuse, the prone position that somebody mentioned, that would happen a lot. But it was usually someone who is very small with about 2 or 3 adults slamming them onto the hard ground. There were stress positions used. I was forced into solitary confinement where it wasn't just like being put into a room. It was this building, and there were multiple stalls in the building, like very, very tiny stalls, maybe 4 to 5 feet across and about 6 feet in length, and each had a tiny little bed in them. And you had to sit on the edge of the bed, and behind you was a camera watching you, and you had to sit there from about 7 o'clock in the morning until about 10 p.m. You weren't allowed to have a shower. You couldn't move. You couldn't talk. And you just had to sit there. I hadn't done anything, and they forced a false confession out of me because it was the only way that I could get out was if I confessed to things that I hadn't done. And that, I think, was the thing that finally broke me. I wasn't able to speak correctly for a couple of weeks getting out of there. I couldn't put words together. I couldn't put sentences together. It was a pretty
I'll tell you this,
time.
Jesse. In the last 3, 4, 5 minutes, you have put sentences together powerfully, eloquently. Just what you just said, I think, is enough. Should be played. This is going to be archived. Should be played for anyone who doubts the horror in all these facilities. This was between the age of 14 and 17. You were locked up in 5 different facilities. If you don't mind my asking, how old are you now?
I'm 27 now.
Okay, so this was 10 years ago. Have you been able, as an adult, and again, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine all the horror you've been through, although you describe it very eloquently. Have you been able to take any action against any of these facilities?
Well, when I first got out, I ended up going off to college, as this was one of the stated goals that was given to them. And the deal with these places is they don't care about, the means to whatever ends they're trying to get at. They do whatever it takes to shape you in the way that your parent or guardian or whoever is telling you to behave. And so I went off to college, and I was having very, very bad post-traumatic stress disorder. I fell into a suicidal depression for several months, and I tried to go see a counselor on campus. And I started telling her about these places, but you've got to understand that 10 years ago, there's no internet, there are no radio shows about this, there was nothing. And it was really difficult to give people any context for it because they couldn't even underrend how things like this went on. It sounded unreal.
One of the reasons for this show, and frankly, one of the reasons that we're going to use what you just said to let people know, so that if another girl in your position needs to go to a counselor, they can say, hey, look, Mark Levine did a radio show. Listen to all of his testimony. I'm not crazy here. This is going on all across the country. So, Jesse, what you've done just now in bravely telling your story will no doubt help hundreds of, maybe more, of young people escape the horror that they're in. I got to move on to the next caller, but thank you so much. It was eloquent, it was persuasive, it was very powerful. Thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you for doing the show, Mark.
I'd say my pleasure, but let's just say it's my honor and privilege. All right, we're going to take one last break, and then I'm going to get to as many calls as I can. I may not get to all of you, but I'm not letting this issue go, I promise. The last segment will feature your calls. We'll be right back after this. All right, here we are. We've got the last segment. We've got only a few minutes left. I've got 4 people on the line. I don't know that I'm going to get to all of you, but I'm going to do the best I can. Each of you have such a powerful story to tell. Thomas, I know you were in Western Samoa. They sent you to Western Samoa?
Yeah, I got sent to Western Samoa in October of 1997.
And how did you get out there? I mean, you're a guy from Texas, right? So how did they get you to Western Samoa?
And I had been to other rehabs in Texas, but my father had just met up with this guy here in Fort Worth, and that's where it was like the toughest whatever place to go. I thought I was going to Utah to a rehab, and whenever I get there, then they start showing us videos of Samoa and Jamaica, and so of course, I'm gonna go to the worst one that there is. So that's just how it is.
Well, you say the worst one that there is. Tell me what happened in Western Samoa.
Well, I mean, I've never talked about really what happened in Western Samoa. I mean, everything. I can put it this way: everything that you've heard and read about, I have witnessed and seen myself. I mean, I can say that.
And
like
so
everything that you've seen and written about.
Beating.
I can't say everything because I don't know what all is out there, but you know, the torture, the sexual molestation, all that stuff. Yeah, that definitely happened. That's not just BS.
How long were you there?
I was there from October of '97 until I turned 18 in March, and they let me go in April.
And how has this affected your life since then?
Oh, man. When I got back, attempted suicide and took the knife. I went from my wrist to my elbow, 13 lacerations on each arm, going up and down, not sideways. And I have horrible PTSD. You know, I'm on Xanax, and it's just been it's been hell. I mean, you know, I forget about it sometimes, but then now, with it all coming back up, you know, it's just all coming back up. It's just a lot of stuff I witnessed. I went through some physical stuff, and I got there after limbo, which limbo was those guys that went through that. I just can't even imagine.
What was limbo?
We went through. Limbo was, well, I didn't get to experience it, so I saw it, but it was there's barbed wire fences in there, and that's where they first took you, like for your first, I don't even know because I didn't go, but and from what I hear, I don't know, a week to 4 weeks to longer. I mean, I don't want to say because I don't know.
You had to do limbo underneath a barbed wire fence?
Oh, yeah. Now, not like limbo the game, but that's just what they call it, limbo, and all you do is work out all day, and I mean, they just treated you it was basically just torture just to break you down right when you got there.
Thomas, you're a very brave person to call in, and I really want to thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I know you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, if any kids that are out there that are, you know, going through this, if we can stop that now, then I mean, it needs to be stopped. And this has gotten way too far. It's gotten way too out of hand. I mean,
it
way
has.
too out of hand.
And your testimony will help do that. And I really want to appreciate your calling in. I appreciate your courage.
Yeah.
I want to try to get some of the other people.
You letting us on here, and I appreciate y'all. We're sure survivors against WASP and on Facebook, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, please check out all those organizations that I mentioned because all of them, I think, can help you. I know that you can never heal completely, but it's something that I think can make you deal with the fact there simply are evil people in the world. And, you know, they're victims of torture, there's victims of the Holocaust, and people move on, and it's rough. But just remember, they're not all people are evil, and some people are trying to help. And, again, very brave to call. Let's go to Elizabeth in Jacksonville, Florida. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hi. We don't have a lot of time, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. I wish we had more. Give me 1 minute. What happened to you?
Basically, the WASP has been talked about a lot.
Right.
I was in their boot camp in Mexico. High impact. I was forced in dog cages, restrained, refused medical attention. If I threw up, I had to eat my vomit.
Oh, my God.
I was laid out in the sun for hours. There's Cross Creek. They kept me in isolation for 3 months, told my parents I wasn't doing anything. I never really got a chance to. And so they got my parents to believe that Mexico was great, and they ordered two people to come in the middle of the night and take me from Cross Creek to Mexico. At I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning. And Mexico is basically where all my problems started, but
no, they started long before then.
Seconds, but from ages 12 to 23, I've been in 39 treatment centers.
Oh my God! Oh my!
Of them were abusive.
That's incredible, and that's awful. And I'm sorry we don't have more time, but Elizabeth, thank you very much for calling in, for sharing your story. And you know, we're gonna do our best to fight back. I hope that you and Thomas and Jesse get a chance to testify before Congress about the horrors that you've undergone. Thank you for calling in. Real quick, let's go to Chelsea in San Diego, California. Hello, Chelsea.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
I'm okay. I don't have much time. I wish I had more time. Tell me what happened to you, real quick.
Well, I'll keep it short and sweet. I was almost murdered in High Impact. I also went to High Impact in Mexico, and I also went to a program called Casa by the Sea in Mexico, both of which were shut down due to abuses by the Mexican government. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just focus on some of the worst things. Like I said, I was almost murdered. Usually when they held you down in the restraining positions, they would put your face up, like they'd put your chin on the ground and grind it into the rocky dirt. Well, this particular incident, the staff member, his name was Miguel, he took a big bucket of soapy water and clothes and dumped it on top of my head while I was being restrained, and then held my head into the mud so long that I passed out. I lost consciousness. And these kinds of things were just so widespread. Like, people would come so close to death. I myself came so close to death in these restraining positions. I don't understand how these practices are still used today.
I don't understand it either, Chelsea. Thank you for calling. Listen, I don't understand any of this, folks. I've heard this for 6 hours. I'm not letting this issue go. I'm going to keep fighting. Please, call your member of Congress. Stop the torture and abuse. This is America. This shouldn't happen anywhere in the world, but it should not happen in the United States of America. And if we work together, we can stop this abuse from happening ever again. This is Mark Levine. More information on my website.